Imagine this. You wake up tomorrow morning and discover that every decision you've ever made, every relationship you've entered, every career path you've chosen, every moment of self-doubt or sudden confidence has been guided by a map you never knew existed. Not a physical map, but something far more insidious. A psychological blueprint etched into your unconscious mind before you even learn to speak. This map doesn't exist in any textbook you've read. It wasn't taught in school or discussed at dinner tables. Yet it has been quietly orchestrating your life, whispering directions through your dreams, shaping your desires, and drawing invisible boundaries around what you believe is possible for yourself. The most unsettling part? This map was designed by someone else entirely, someone who lived over a century ago in a world that no longer exists, yet whose fingerprints remain pressed deep into the architecture of your psyche. Consider this paradox. You pride yourself on being independent, on making your own choices, on breaking free from the constraints that held back previous generations of women. You've fought for your voice, demanded equality, shattered glass ceilings, and yet, in the quiet moments between sleep and waking, in the split-second hesitations before you speak your mind, in the subtle ways, you diminish yourself to make others comfortable. Something ancient and programmed still pulls the strings. What if I told you that Sigmund Freud, the man history remembers for reducing women to penis, envy, and hysteria, actually left behind a far more sophisticated and revolutionary understanding of the female mind? What if his most profound insights about women were buried beneath layers of misinterpretation, cultural bias, and deliberate suppression? What if the very theories that seem to diminish women actually contain the keys to their liberation? Here lies the great contradiction that haunts every woman alive today. The same psychological framework that has been used to justify female inferiority contains within it the blueprint for female transcendence. The map that was meant to keep women contained actually reveals the exact coordinates of their imprisonment, and therefore, the precise route to freedom. Think about the questions that circle through your mind in the darkness before dawn. Why do you second-guess insights that prove to be correct? Why do you apologize for taking up space, for having needs, for wanting more? Why do certain patterns repeat in your relationships, despite your conscious efforts to change them? Why does success sometimes feel like betrayal, not just of others' expectations, but of something deeper within yourself? These are not random neuroses or personal failings. They are symptoms of a psychological territory that has been mapped by invisible hands, charted according to rules you never agreed to follow. Every woman carries within her unconscious mind a cartography of limitations, borders drawn, not by her own experience, but by centuries of collective conditioning about what it means to be female in this world. The most brilliant trap ever constructed is not made of bars or chains, but of internalized maps that feel like personal truth. The prison guard becomes unnecessary when the prisoner believes the cell walls are the boundaries of the entire universe. This is why liberation movements that focus only on external barriers often fall short. They demolish the visible walls while leaving the invisible architecture of limitation intact. But here's what makes this revelation both terrifying and magnificent. If the map is not real, if it's merely a construct passed down through generations of unconscious transmission, then it can be redrawn. If your psychological boundaries were installed by others, they can be relocated by you. If your sense of what's possible was programmed before you could consent to the programming, then your awakened consciousness can rewrite the code. The woman who discovers she has been living according to someone else's map faces a choice that will define the rest of her existence. Will she continue following roads that lead to destinations she never chose? Or will she pick up the pen and begin drawing new territories into being? The map exists. It has shaped every woman's life in ways both subtle and profound. Most will never see it, never question it, never realize they have the power to redraw it entirely. But for those brave enough to examine the blueprint of their own psychological territory, what awaits is not just personal transformation, but the complete reconstruction of what it means to be female in this world. Before we venture deeper into this psychological labyrinth, take a moment to subscribe to this channel and leave a like if this exploration is already shifting something within you. Share your thoughts in the comments. Your insights help illuminate these hidden territories for others who are searching for deeper understanding of themselves and the world around them. What you're about to discover may fundamentally alter how you see yourself and every woman in your life. The question is not whether you're ready to see the map. The question is whether you're ready to burn it down and draw a new one. To understand why this invisible map exists, we must first confront an uncomfortable truth. The human psyche is not born free. From the moment consciousness emerges, it is shaped by forces that operate below the threshold of awareness. What Freud discovered, and what modern neuroscience now confirms, is that the mind's architecture is built not through conscious choice, but through unconscious absorption. Consider what Carl Jung called the collective unconscious, a shared psychological inheritance that carries the accumulated experiences of our species. For women, this inheritance includes millennia of conditioning about power, agency, and self-worth. Every generation passes down not just genetic material, but psychological programming. The daughter inherits not only her mother's eyes, but her mother's internalized beliefs about what it means to be female in a world designed by and for men. This is where Freud's genius becomes apparent, though it was buried beneath the limitations of his era. He recognized that the female psyche develops within a double bind that most never escape. The young girl must simultaneously identify with her mother, while recognizing that in the broader world, feminine qualities are devalued. She must learn to be nurturing and self-sacrificing while watching power flow to those who embody the opposite traits. Nietzsche understood this dynamic when he wrote about master and slave morality. The feminine has been relegated to what he termed slave morality, deriving worth through service, suffering, and self-denial, rather than through the exercise of will and power. But here's the crucial insight Freud grasped. This isn't a natural state. It's a constructed reality that becomes internalized as psychological truth. The problem runs deeper than conscious belief systems. It operates at the level of what Arthur Schopenhauer called the will, the unconscious force that drives all human behavior. For women, this fundamental life force becomes twisted through societal conditioning. The will to create becomes channeled into creating comfort for others. The will to power becomes redirected into the power to please. The will to expansion becomes contracted into the compulsion to shrink. Viktor Frankl, who survived the Nazi concentration camps, discovered that human beings can endure almost any suffering if they can find meaning in it. But what happens when an entire gender is taught to find meaning primarily through self-sacrifice? What happens when meaning becomes synonymous with martyrdom? The result is a psychological architecture that mistakes suffering for virtue, limitation for love. Jean-Paul Sartre argued that humans are condemned to be free, that we have no choice but to choose, and that this freedom is both our greatest burden and our greatest gift. But the hidden map we're exploring reveals a more sinister reality. Most women have been conditioned to choose their own imprisonment. They select careers that don't threaten, relationships that don't challenge their partners, and dreams that don't disturb the status quo. They experience this not as oppression, but as moral goodness. This is the psychological phenomenon Freud documented but never fully explained. The way external control becomes internalized as personal preference. The prison guard no longer needs to lock the cell because the prisoner has forgotten that the door even exists. The tragedy is not that women are prevented from pursuing their deepest desires, it's that they've been taught to desire their own limitations. The mechanism operates through what modern psychology calls learned helplessness. When attempts to assert agency are consistently punished or discouraged, the psyche adapts by no longer attempting to assert agency at all. But this adaptation goes beyond behavior. It reshapes identity itself. The woman doesn't just act helpless. She becomes convinced that helplessness is her natural state. This conditioning is so pervasive, so woven into the fabric of language, culture, and relationship, that it becomes invisible. Like the air we breathe, it surrounds us completely while remaining unnoticed. The map doesn't feel imposed, it feels like reality itself. And this invisibility is precisely what makes it so powerful and so dangerous. The most insidious aspect of this psychological map is not what it prevents you from doing, it's what it prevents you from wanting. The ultimate form of control is not external force, but the manipulation of desire itself. When you no longer want what threatens the system no longer needs to threaten you. Watch a successful woman minimize her achievements in conversation. Notice how she deflects praise, attributes her success to luck or others, or quickly changes the subject when her competence becomes the focus. This isn't modesty, it's a neurological response programmed so deeply that it operates below conscious awareness. Her brain has been wired to perceive her own success as a form of social violence. This phenomenon operates through what neuroscientists call cognitive dissonance reduction. When a woman's achievements conflict with internalized beliefs about female acceptability, her mind automatically works to resolve the tension. But instead of questioning the limiting beliefs, it typically diminishes the achievement. The map literally rewrites reality to maintain its own integrity. Consider the epidemic of imposter syndrome among high-achieving women. This isn't a character flaw or lack of confidence. It's evidence of a psychological system at war with itself. One part of the psyche drives toward excellence, while another part insists that excellence is incompatible with femininity. The result is a constant internal negotiation, an exhausting performance of being both powerful and apologetic, competent and non-threatening. The consequences extend far beyond individual psychology. When half the population operates from an internally constrained map, entire societies lose access to their full creative and intellectual potential. The innovations never conceived, the problems never solved, the leadership never exercised. These represent not just personal losses, but civilizational ones. The map also shapes what psychologists call approach versus avoidance motivation, where men are typically conditioned toward approach behaviors pursuing opportunities, taking risks. Claiming space women are often conditioned toward avoidance behaviors. The focus becomes not what they want to gain, but what they want to avoid losing: approval, safety, connection. This creates a fundamentally defensive relationship with life itself. Perhaps most devastatingly, the map programs women to monitor themselves through what sociologist Pierre Bourdieu called the male gaze, even when no men are present. They internalize external judgment so completely that they become their own jailers. The woman checking her appearance, moderating her voice, or second-guessing her instincts isn't responding to immediate social pressure. She's responding to a surveillance system that has been installed in her own mind. This self-surveillance creates what researchers term cognitive load, a portion of mental resources constantly devoted to monitoring and adjusting behavior to meet external expectations. It's like running complex software in the background of your consciousness, slowing down every other mental process. The brilliant woman who can't think straight around certain people isn't experiencing a personal failing, she's experiencing systemic cognitive sabotage. The map also determines what philosopher Michel Foucault called docile bodies, subjects who police themselves so effectively that external authority becomes unnecessary. The woman who never applies for the promotion, never voices the dissenting opinion, never pursues the unconventional path, isn't being actively oppressed in any visible way. She has simply internalized a system of limitations so completely that it operates as personal preference. The most tragic consequence is the phenomenon of crystallized potential human capabilities that become frozen at the point of initial conditioning. The girl who stops raising her hand in math class doesn't just lose access to mathematical concepts. She loses access to the part of herself that confidently engages with complex problems. This isn't temporary. It becomes neurologically embedded, creating what appears to be natural gender differences that are actually artifacts of social programming. But here's what makes this revelation both terrifying and hopeful. Systems that are constructed can be deconstructed. Maps that are drawn can be redrawn. The same neuroplasticity that allows conditioning to become embedded also allows it to be rewired. The question becomes not whether change is possible, but whether you're ready to undertake the radical surgery required to excise the map from your unconscious mind. The first act of rebellion is recognition itself. You cannot escape a prison you don't know exists. The moment you see the invisible walls that have been constraining your psychological territory, something irreversible happens. The spell of inevitability breaks. What felt like natural law reveals itself as arbitrary construction. What seemed like personal limitation exposes itself as imposed boundary. But recognition alone is not enough. The map has been etched into your neural pathways through decades of repetition. It exists not just as conscious belief, but as embodied response, as automatic reaction, as the very architecture of how you process reality. To redraw it requires nothing less than psychological revolution, a systematic dismantling of internal systems that have been operating below the threshold of awareness. This is where Freud's hidden insight becomes revolutionary. He understood that the unconscious speaks in symbols, responds to ritual, and changes through what he called working through. the gradual process of making unconscious patterns conscious, then consciously choosing new patterns. The woman who discovers her psychological map must become both archaeologist and architect, excavating the buried structures of limitation while simultaneously designing new territories of possibility. The process begins with what philosophers call productive discomfort. Every time you feel the urge to apologize for speaking, pause. Notice the sensation in your body, the voice in your mind telling you that your words are too much, too sharp, too confident. This discomfort is not a warning, it's a GPS signal showing you exactly where the old map is trying to reassert control. The rebellion lies not in avoiding the discomfort, but in moving directly toward it. Consider the women throughout history who redrew their own maps so radically that they redrew the maps for all women. Marie Curie, who refused to accept that brilliance was incompatible with femininity, endured decades of professional isolation and ridicule. She didn't just pursue science, she pursued science while remaining unapologetically female, forcing the world to expand its definition of both categories. Her rebellion wasn't against femininity, but against the artificial limitations placed upon it. Virginia Woolf recognized that the act of writing from authentic female consciousness was itself revolutionary. She wrote, "A woman must have money and a room of her own if she is to write fiction." But the deeper truth she understood was that a woman must have psychological space and economic independence if she is to think her own thoughts, rather than inherited thoughts. The external room was merely the symbol of the internal territory she was claiming. The rebellion requires what psychologists call emotional regulation training, literally rewiring your nervous system to respond differently to disapproval, conflict, and social tension. When you express an unpopular opinion and feel the familiar anxieties surge through your system, that's your old map screaming in protest. Your task is not to eliminate the feeling, but to breathe through it, to recognize it as information rather than instruction. Over time, your nervous system learns that speaking truth does not actually threaten your survival. This process mirrors what happens in trauma therapy. The therapist doesn't try to convince the client that their fear is irrational. They help the client's nervous system learn through direct experience that old threats are no longer present. Similarly, redrawing your psychological map requires proving to your unconscious mind, through repeated experience, that authenticity is not actually dangerous. One of the most powerful tools for this rewiring is what Jungian analysts call active imagination, deliberately engaging with the symbolic language of the unconscious. Begin to pay attention to your dreams, not for literal meaning, but for the emotional territories they reveal. If you dream of being trapped in a house, what does that house represent in your waking life? If you dream of flying, what part of yourself yearns for that freedom? The unconscious is constantly offering you a compass toward your authentic self. You need only learn to read its language. The rebellion also requires building what resilience researchers call stress inoculation. Start with small acts of defiance against your internal map. Wear something that feels too bold. Express an opinion you would normally keep to yourself. Apply for something you think you're not qualified for. Each act of conscious rebellion against internal limitation literally rewires your neural pathways, creating what neuroscientists call experience-dependent plasticity. But perhaps the most crucial element of this psychological revolution is understanding that authenticity is not a destination, it's a practice. You don't find your true self hiding somewhere beneath the conditioning. You create your true self through the ongoing choice to act from your own center rather than from others' expectations. Every moment presents the opportunity to choose, will you follow the old map or draw a new line? The women who successfully redraw their maps share certain characteristics. They develop what psychologists call differentiated self-worth, deriving value from internal standards rather than external approval. They cultivate what philosophers term existential courage, the willingness to create meaning rather than inherit it. They practice what spiritual traditions call non-attachment, holding their identities lightly enough to allow them to evolve. This is not a gentle process of self-improvement. This is psychological warfare against systems of limitation that have been operating for generations. It requires the same kind of courage that revolutionaries throughout history have needed, the willingness to be misunderstood, criticized, and temporarily isolated in service of a larger truth. The rebellion is not just personal, it's political, spiritual, and evolutionary. Every woman who successfully redraws her own map makes it easier for other women to see that such redrawing is possible. Here lies the revelation that changes everything, the truth so profound that it not only explains the mystery of the hidden map, but transforms your understanding of reality itself. The map was never actually about women at all. It was about power. And the most devastating secret of all is that the same forces that created the feminine map of limitation simultaneously created the masculine map of emotional imprisonment. What Freud glimpsed, but never fully articulated, was that the psychological architecture constraining women exists in perfect symbiosis with the psychological architecture constraining men. The woman taught to diminish her power pairs perfectly with the man taught to fear his vulnerability. The woman conditioned to prioritize others' needs complements the man conditioned to suppress his own emotional needs. The system doesn't just limit women, it creates a psychological ecosystem where limitation and disconnection reinforce each other across gender lines. This is the ultimate manipulation, convincing half the population that their strength lies in self-sacrifice, while convincing the other half that their strength lies in emotional isolation. The result is a world where authentic power, the integration of strength and sensitivity, ambition and empathy, leadership and compassion, becomes nearly impossible for anyone to achieve. But here's where the revelation becomes revolutionary. When you redraw your own map, you don't just liberate yourself, you begin to collapse the entire system, because the maps only work in relationship to each other. When women stop playing the role of emotional caretaker, men are forced to develop their own emotional intelligence. When women stop apologizing for their competence, the cultural definition of leadership itself must expand. When women refuse to remain small, everyone's understanding of human potential shifts. The deepest truth is that the feminine map was never designed to benefit men either. It was designed to benefit a system of control that diminishes everyone. The man who cannot access his own emotional depth is as imprisoned as the woman who cannot access her own power. The difference is that his prison is invisible even to him, while hers becomes visible the moment she tries to expand beyond it. This realization reframes everything. Your struggle to reclaim your authentic self is not selfish, it's evolutionary. You're not just fighting for personal freedom, you're fighting for human freedom. You're not just redrawing your own map, you're participating in the redrawing of human consciousness itself. Consider what becomes possible when this understanding spreads. Relationships based on mutual authenticity rather than complementary limitations. Workplaces that value both strategic thinking and emotional intelligence. Leadership that integrates both vision and compassion. Children raised to develop their full human potential rather than gender-appropriate portions of it. But the most profound implication is this. The very act of a woman reclaiming her complete self, her power, her voice, her desires, her boundaries, creates permission for everyone around her to become more whole. The woman who speaks her truth gives others permission to speak theirs. The woman who pursues her ambitions without apology models possibility for others trapped in their own limitation. The woman who integrates strength and softness demonstrates that such integration is human, not gender-specific. This is why the resistance to women's full empowerment is so fierce. It's not just about women. It's about the dismantling of a control system that has shaped human consciousness for millennia. Every woman who refuses to remain within prescribed psychological boundaries threatens the entire architecture of limitation that constrains human potential. The final, most powerful truth is that you were never meant to live according to any external map. The deepest rebellion is not against feminine limitation, it's against the entire concept that any human being should live according to psychological territories drawn by others. Your authentic self is not feminine or masculine, it's fully human. Your power is not threatening to healthy people, it's threatening only to systems that require human diminishment to survive. When you stand at the edge of your old map and look out into the unmarked territory beyond, what you're seeing is not chaos, it's possibility itself. The blank space represents not emptiness, but fullness waiting to be explored. The territories beyond the inherited boundaries are not dangerous. They're alive with potential that has been waiting centuries for someone brave enough to claim them. This is your moment of choice. You can return to the comfortable familiarity of the known map, accepting its limitations as the price of belonging. Or you can step forward into the unmarked territory, understanding that your journey into authentic selfhood is not just personal transformation, it's a contribution to human evolution itself. The woman who burns her inherited map and begins drawing her own becomes a lighthouse for others, navigating the same dark waters. Her authenticity gives others permission for their own. Her courage makes courage possible for others. Her refusal to remain small creates space for others to become large. You are not just reclaiming yourself. You are reclaiming what it means to be human in a world that has forgotten the full spectrum of human potential. Every step you take beyond the boundaries of your inherited map is a step toward a reality where no one, regardless of gender, needs to sacrifice essential parts of themselves to belong. The ultimate truth is this: the map was never real. The boundaries were never fixed. The limitations were never inevitable. What seemed like personal weakness was actually collective conditioning. What felt like individual failure was actually systemic suppression. And what appears to be personal healing is actually a revolutionary act. The question is no longer whether you can change. The question is whether you will.